DDT was an insecticide in the 1940s and 50s. We remember those pictures of them famously spraying them on kids and driving through neighborhoods and just fumigating the entire neighborhood with this to kill the insects and the mosquitoes. And then right around 1962, a woman named Rachel Carson came out with a book named Silent Spring, and this was really one of the first grassroots activists. It was a book, and it drew from examples of real communities and the DDT damage that were caused in those communities to the birds, to the people. And this sparked really like a grassroots revolution. It worked its way, the ideology worked its way into music, into books, more books, into comics of the times, and in the newspaper clippings. And we saw shortly after that book was published, DDT began to be phased out in the United States. But she was attacked for this, of course. Even back then, there was articles calling her hysterical. This is one of the headlines. This is now, in college courses they study this. Rachel Carson, why did chemical companies attack Carson for Silent Spring? But now we know that she was right, and so were many other people.
It's
And
interesting too,
here,
and on the topics we talk about, just very quickly to put a plug out there for Suzanne Humphrey's book, Dissolving Illusions, which really gets into sort of the history of vaccinations. And when we have these conversations about vaccine hesitancy or anti-vaxxers or however you want to talk about it, Suzanne Humphrey's a nephrologist, a doctor that really started questioning the vaccines she was watching being used in her hospital, goes back and does an incredible in-depth look at the history of polio, the history of smallpox, and those vaccine programs, because those are the ones we always hear about, right? If someone says, well, I'm really questioning vaccinating my child, what about smallpox? What about polio? And she clearly lays out that connection between DDT, that rise in the use of DDT is right along with this sort of outbreak of polio. And then you look at the side effects of DDT, and one of them is paralysis. So
exactly.
there's a lot that, DDT sort of is blamed for, and a lot it's not blamed for that very well could have affected, diseases like polio and things we were experiencing in those times.
Right. And so the next storyline here is why people like her, people like Rachel, ourselves, everybody else out there fight so hard on the front end. So it's been discovered now, barrels of DDT off the coast of California. So thousands of barrels of suspected toxic DDT found dumped in California ocean. Now, this was the headline in April, and it says marine scientists say they have found what they believe to be as many as 25,000 barrels possibly containing DDT dumped off the Southern California coast near Catalina Island, where a massive underwater toxic waste site dating back to the Second World War has long been suspected. Now, these are researchers from UC's San Diego Scripps Institute of Oceanography, and they were looking at the seafloor, about 36,000 acres of that seafloor, and they were using old maritime logs from ships that showed that up until about 1972, this was thought to be a dumping ground for a lot of these barrels, and it turns out it was true. And that stopped actually because of what's called the Ocean Dumping Act. So the reason that was stopped in 72 was because legislative action, which is a positive side note there. But
Yeah.
now let's continue with this story. Now they're saying major pollution in LA. So this is the headline. This is the most recent headline. Scientists reveal major DDT pollution along Los Angeles coast. They're labeling it one of the largest known chemical dump sites in the world. This is absolutely staggering headlines here. As we're taking a break from COVID, this is the kind of stuff that
Yeah.
needs to be spotlighted. And what is that causing? There's actually science now that it's been affecting the sea lions for quite some time. I'm sure other marine life, but this study in general, California sea lions face unprecedented rate of cancer. This was a study published in the Frontiers of Marine Science, and the study was titled "Persistent Contaminants of Herpes Virus OTHV1 are positively associated with cancer in wild California sea lions." So they're saying the prevalence of cancer among these sea lions is one of the highest among mammals, up to 25% of adults. They were looking over a span of 20 years in this study. So this is no small study. This is an extensive, very well-researched study showing this. And these are the long-lasting issues, as we're seeing now, of these chemical companies, and why we're fighting so hard up front when we know certain chemicals like DDT or whatever we're going to talk about, or even the radiation in the ocean. I mean, the similarities between these two stories
Yeah.
is really shocking and scary to me.
And all of it giving me even more, reason and good feelings about having left California. I still picture my 2 young children splashing around on the beach there in Malibu, and just thinking, my God, you know, how much radiation was coming from Fukushima. Never even thought about the fact that some genius decided, let's just dump barrels of DDT. I'm assuming those barrels are probably made out of metal, and I'm assuming they've rusted through and are now just leaking all over the place. Who'd have thought about that, you know, when they were dumping it? I mean, this is just the type of stupidity that, you know, makes you shake your head as human beings, not thinking into the future of what it's going to mean. And I feel bad for all of our friends and families that live in California now. I mean, it's not enough you're masked like crazy, and I guess that's finally lifting, but, you know, just this idea that nobody seems to care, that environmental impact, you know, you're so exposed, the air, the trade winds, the ocean currents, all of that, just watching, you know, more and more toxic chemicals and radiation onto the people there. It's really, it's sad because it's such a beautiful part of this country.
If you like that clip, then be sure to check out our live broadcast of The High Wire every Thursday morning at 11 a.m. Pacific Time. You can watch it on Facebook, YouTube, iTunes, and Twitter. We'll see you there.